This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration stops the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine over suspected blood clot links. We'll take a closer look at Egypt's recent move to strengthen security cooperation with a number of African countries. And international concerns mount over Japan's decision to release treated radioactive wastewater into the ocean. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Data costs in South Africa have fallen by 30%. And China's exports in the first quarter of the year have gone up by 40%. We'll have a look at the data and plenty more stories in the world of business in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs.
We seem to have really good news first, Rama. We'll see you in a bit with that. But let's begin with what could potentially be another setback in plans to get more COVID-19 vaccines distributed in Africa. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has called for an immediate pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Federal health agencies say there may be a connection between the vaccine and a rare disorder involving blood clots. The New York Times first reported that at least 6 recipients had suffered severe side effects, including 1 death and 1 critical hospitalization. All 6 recipients were women between the ages of 18 and 48. The CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is to meet tomorrow to discuss the cases. Meanwhile, the FDA has launched an investigation. Well, for more on this, let's go live to Washington, D.C., where Giles Gibson is standing by for us. Giles, thank you so much for joining us. What more can you tell us about the reasons behind the decision and the pause, the use of the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson? Well, we seem to have lost Giles. We hope to get him back in the program. Let's head over to Johannesburg, where Angela is standing by for us. So South Africa is among the countries that have approved the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Angela Coppola joins us from Johannesburg to discuss how the latest news could impact the rollout of the vaccine in that country. Thank you so much for joining us. Angela, hi there. South Africa's health minister was scheduled to make a statement on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine's temporary suspension in the U.S. What can we expect from this address?
Well, he's speaking at the moment, and what we can expect is Mkhize explaining the background, the context, all the issues that will impact their decision on whether to pause or not to pause. But bear in mind that in the past, South Africa has been very cautious and very pragmatic in terms of how they approach vaccine treatments. As AstraZeneca was put on pause and hold, and in fact that dose, those 1,500,000 doses was actually sold off to the AU a little while ago. So if they're going to be cautious like they were with the AstraZeneca situation, they're likely to listen to what's happening in the US, especially with the FDA and their approach that they're going to take. But it is a small percentage of people that are suffering or that have suffered these potential side effects. So we're waiting for more background. Mkhize will probably have been in touch with Aspen, the local producers of the vaccine here, to see what the situation is and what their suggestions and expectations are. So for now, we wait to hear what Mkhize is going to speak to the public about. He is going to be speaking probably 2 or 3 languages so that the message is conveyed to everybody. As it stands right now, around 288,000 people have been vaccinated with that J&J vaccine because of the move away from AstraZeneca. So we have to wait to see what Mkhize, the health minister, has to say.
Angela, what do you foresee being the likely impact of the developments in the U.S., given that South Africa is likely to be a stakeholder in the production of the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine?
Well, as you know, Aspen are the big manufacturers on the continent of this vaccine. They have this state-of-the-art facility in the Eastern Cape. They've been contracted to produce around 300 million doses of the vaccine. It's very likely that when the first cases started emerging about this rare blood clotting, that their research and development business element within J&J started looking at workarounds or modifying the solution. That really quick exercise to do, provided they can identify what the problem is.
Thank you so much for that, Angela Coppola, speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, African heads of state and governments have decided to forge partnerships with major global vaccine-making companies to manufacture COVID-19 doses on the continent. During a virtual meeting, the current chairperson of the AU, who is also the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, said that building a local capacity to produce vaccines was essential to meeting Africa's needs.
Prominent African presidents and heads of continental and global institutions took part in the 2 days high-level virtual conference aimed at expanding vaccine manufacturing in Africa. AU chairperson President Felix Tshisekedi said Africa needs to intensify efforts aimed at strengthening manufacturing of vaccines on the continent.
The capacity to manufacture therapeutic products, vaccines and diagnostic products. Only the capacity to provide these products ourselves can truly guarantee access to the necessary input. Several examples demonstrate that Africa, if Africa is to strengthen her capacity, but can do that, but that will need concerted effort. There is therefore need for the continent to invest in the local manufacturing.
During the meeting under the theme Africa's Vaccines Manufacturing for Health Security, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Rwandan President Paul Kagame said that Africa must forge a public-private partnership in vaccines manufacturing.
Africa needs to expand production capacity for vaccines and other essential medical products. I can't agree more with President Cyril Ramaphosa. In line with our agenda of increasing domestic health financing, it is important for Africa to forge strategic public-private partnerships for vaccine manufacturing on our continent.
Africa is already getting global support in its quest to build the capacity to fully manufacture COVID-19 vaccines within the continent. The World Health Organization has been supporting those efforts.
WHO is resolutely committed to working with the African Union, its member states, and the Africa CDC to support the development of domestic vaccine manufacturing capacity as part of our shared efforts to build a healthier, safer, fairer future for Africa.
Still, Africa needs finance to make up the plan of developing and manufacturing vaccines within the continent a reality. And the appeal being made is for close to $12 billion for the developed world and financial institutions to deliver. CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
For more on that story, earlier we spoke with Professor Geoffrey Mpahlele, who is the Vice President for Research at the South African Medical Research Council.
Obviously, the first thing is that they can take the lead in generating the primary research and research that leads towards product development, so that they are able to take the lead in development of these products. We can talk about vaccines, not just COVID-19, but all kinds of vaccines, diagnostic products, and many other drugs that are needed for treatment of patients. So it's one way to do this, but another way would be to partner with international organizations in doing research. And the most important thing is that you need to have commitment and vision. And by commitment, I'm talking about commitment in terms of investing resources in the plan that they talk about. So if they talk, but then they don't invest things like financial resources to ensure that the plan is realized, obviously this will not be realized at the end. The way this should be done is that there should be a continuous discussions and continuous search for partnerships and collaborations and networking, so that you build your own resources, you build your own research base that can lead towards product development. When they enter into collaborations, they must remove the obstacles which are actually on the way of many developing countries to really take the lead in research and development. It might be difficult with existing patents that are already in place, but for the future patents, if they are in collaborations, they should allow both African countries and other countries to really manufacture these products, not just developed countries taking the lead in manufacturing their products. Research and development, this is where the gap is. So obviously, if African scientists and countries are able to use the capacity that is already in place to strengthen preclinical research and development, that will really give us more mileage and more muscle in terms of our research and development agenda, so that we don't only rely on products that are developed elsewhere and they are shipped to Africa for clinical testing.
Well, let's go back to that story where the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has called for an immediate pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the U.S. And standing by for us from Washington, D.C. is Giles Gibson. Giles, thank you so much for joining us. Hi there. What more can you tell us, Giles, about the reasons behind the decision to pause the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine there?
Well, we've had a statement from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and also from the Food and Drug Administration here in the United States, and they've said that there have been 6 reported cases of this severe type of blood clot. That's out of almost 7 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine that have been administered so far. So we're talking about less than 1 in a million here. The two organisations are also saying that they wanted to put in this pause for perhaps just a couple of days because this particular type of blood clot requires a different type of treatment to most other types of blood clots. So they wanted to make physicians all over the United States as aware as possible as they could be. They are now going to have what's known as an advisory committee meeting here in the US on Wednesday to discuss exactly how long this pause is actually going to go on for. But we've already had FDA officials saying that it's only expected to go on for a matter of days and that they are really doing all of this just out of an abundance of caution.
Speak to us, Giles, about how this development could affect the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine rollout in the US and the rest of the world.
Yeah, just in the last few minutes, actually, we've had a briefing from some of President Biden's top advisors when it comes to the coronavirus response. And the clear message that we're getting from the White House is that this pause is not really going to have any sort of a large impact on the rollout of coronavirus vaccines here in the United States. And that's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not a particularly common vaccine here in the US. It only makes up about 5% of the vaccine doses that have been administered so far all over the country. And also just because they have a lot of supply of 2 other vaccines, the Moderna vaccine as well as the Pfizer vaccine. But when it comes to the rest of the world, that's perhaps not the case, because for a lot of countries, especially in Africa, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a very attractive option before this because, of course, it's just a single shot vaccine and it's also stored just in a regular refrigerator. It doesn't require those extremely low storage temperatures that the Pfizer vaccine, for example, requires. So there is now concern that, like what we've seen in Europe with the concerns about the AstraZeneca vaccine, that this pause may only go on for a couple of days, but it could have a much longer impact just in terms of making people more hesitant, more nervous about getting this particular vaccine.
And that's more of what we were hearing in our previous bulletins from other people that were speaking on this, Giles. Thank you so much for joining us. Giles Gibson speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Well, Burkina Faso's former president, Blaise Compaoré, has been charged in connection with the murder of another former leader, Thomas Sankara. The then president was killed in 1987 in a coup led by Compaoré. Sankara was seen by many as a revolutionary and charismatic leader. The military tribunal charged Compaoré in absentia. He faces additional charges of undermining state security. Compaoré fled to Côte d'Ivoire following his ouster in 2014. Previous efforts to arrest him in 2015 failed after Côte d'Ivoire declined to extradite him. Egypt has moved to strengthen its security ties with several African nations. It recently announced that it had signed a military agreement with Burundi to boost security cooperation and intelligence sharing. That announcement came just a few days after Egypt signed a memorandum of understanding with Uganda that enables enhanced military cooperation between the two countries. Adel Emroui has more details.
In March, Egyptian and Sudanese military chiefs of staff signed a cooperation agreement. It aims to boost joint defense programs and also sets the framework for the sharing of military intelligence. This month, Cairo announced similar intelligence and military cooperation agreements with Uganda and Burundi, making it clear that the North African country is applying a new military vision for Africa based on greater cooperation on security matters.
The military and intelligence cooperation has come about to face big regional developments. All these nations face the threat of terrorism. Military cooperation will increase the capabilities of these nations. Egypt is also keen to increase cooperation with these countries as they could empower Egypt's position in the Grand Renaissance Dam talks.
The Uganda People's Defense Forces says the agreement signed was between its Chieftaincy of Military Intelligence and the Egyptian Intelligence Bureau. Cairo considers this development a great shift in its ties with Kampala. Uganda has historically opposed Egypt's policy regarding the building of projects along the River Nile. Relations have, however, improved in recent years, and in 2014, Egypt established a representative military office in Kampala.
Since President El-Sisi took office in 2014, Egypt managed to develop diplomatic ties with African states. Cooperation in all fields has been enhanced. The military cooperation agreement is a result of these efforts. I think these recent developments highlight the success of Egypt's African foreign policy.
Burundi's agreement marked its first military committee meeting with Egypt in Cairo last Saturday. The military agreements promise expansion in joint military exercises, which developed significantly after Egypt signed its first African military cooperation agreement this year with Sudan. All three countries are Nile Basin nations. The selection is intentional. For decades, Cairo has not paid much attention for its African neighbors. But since the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam talks tension sparked in 2011, Egypt has been investing heavily to restore ties with its continental partners. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including international concerns mount over Japan's decision to release treated radioactive wastewater into the ocean. And environmental campaigners in Uganda step up efforts to reduce plastic pollution.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back. You're watching news making headlines right here on Africa Live. Japan's government has approved a plan to release more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive wastewater into the ocean from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. CGTN's reporter Yu Yang takes a look at how the Chinese government and people have reacted to the move.
I think it's quite unfair. The Japanese government is very selfish. The dumping will not only have huge impacts on countries around the Asia-Pacific region, but around the world as well.
We aren't currently sure how much of an impact this will have on China. But wastewater from a nuclear power plant could definitely have negative impacts on the fishing industry.
Japan says it will give the plant's operator, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, 2 years to prepare for the water's release. China's foreign ministry has expressed a grave concern over the decision, saying it won't only affect Japan, but will also seriously damage international public health and the interests of people in neighboring countries.
Japan should re-evaluate the issue and refrain from wantonly discharging the wastewater before reaching consensus with all stakeholders and the IAEA through full consultations. China will continue to watch closely the developments of the matter together with the international community, and it reverses the right to further response.
Fukushima Daiichi's number 1 to 3 reactors suffered cold meltdowns when they were struck during a magnitude 9.0 earthquake and ensuing tsunami that hit northeast Japan in 2011. The plant has been generating radiation-tainted water since the reaction, and it still needs to use water to cool the reactors. The water has been treated using an advanced liquid processing system, or ALPS, to remove most contaminants. However, things like tritium, a radioactive byproduct of nuclear reactors, are hard to filter out. South Korea has also voiced its concerns, with the foreign ministry spokesman Choi Yong-sam saying it will be difficult to accept Japan's decision if there's no sufficient consultations. Some environmental groups, including Friends of the Earth Japan and the Citizens Commission on Nuclear Energy, said they have collected more than 64,000 signatures from 88 countries and regions in protest against the decision. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga says the first release of nuclear wastewater into the ocean will take place in about 2 years. The plan has sparked health and environment concerns both in Japan and nearby countries. Phoebe Amoroso has more from Tokyo.
Well, it comes after quite some discussions over the past couple of years or more. There was a government panel last year that gave 2 options for disposing of this water. One was to evaporate it and one was to release it into the sea. And they said that releasing it was the most technically feasible. So currently the water contains tritium. It's already been filtered to remove many radionuclides, but this still retains tritium, which is, according to experts, one of the least harmful radioactive substances to health. Now, what they will do is still take precautions and dilute that down to 1/40 of national set safety standards and release that over 3 decades or more. But in order to do that, they have to build specialist facilities, which will take about 2 years. Now, one of the reasons the government has made the decision now is that the storage tanks where the water is currently being held are beginning to reach full capacity, scheduled to fill up by autumn 2022. So the decision has been pushed through.
Plastic pollution is currently one of the biggest environmental concerns across the world due to the increasing use of single-use plastics. In Uganda, environmental campaigners are using any means possible, from a floating plastic boat to plastic attire, to address the issue. Leon Sinyanga has more on that story.
This is the world's first recycled plastic sailing dough. It's called Flippy Floppy, and it has traversed major ports of East Africa's Lake Victoria. It's on an exhibition to promote action on plastic pollution on the region's freshwater bodies.
It's so much danger, how it affects our oceans, how it affects our environment, how it affects our livelihood in animals, human beings, and in totally this, what I feel it's going to be a big blunder what we are going to do now if you are not taking action now, because the next generation will really blame us.
While the Flippy Floppy makes it round East Africa, elsewhere, Benedicta Nanyonga is doing her part too. Through her women's organization in her community, they turn one of the most commonly used plastics into sellable merchandise.
We collect the straws. Wherever we find them, use these straws. We treat them. We start weaving in different products. We can make a mat, shopping bag, safari bag, laptop bag, clutch bag, so many hand luggage bag.
Straws and plastic bottles make up an estimated 600 tons of plastic that are consumed in Uganda every day. Most of these plastics are disposed of irresponsibly. The uncollected plastics clog city drains and wetlands. For campaigners like Sandra Subi, any approach will help change the mindset in dealing with plastics.
We actually find different ways to talk about this. You know, like now I just sang it in song and people will go away. Chidagala, chidagala, chitwagalo, kulagula. It's like, oh, or someone will say, oh, there was that girl in the green outfit, you know, so all these things. Oh, what was the reason? By the way, what, you know, and that starts the conversation.
Uganda has banned the use of single-use plastics, but enforcing the measures has not been followed through. Despite the existing policy efforts in addressing single-use plastics, environmental campaigners feel more needs to be done. They want public awareness to be raised about the environmental harm of plastics. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's stay in Uganda, which has begun an ambitious project to restore forest cover in its semi-arid areas. The program is taking place in the northeast of the country. The government and the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization are supporting forest growers in the Karamoja region to plant trees. Isabel Nakira reports.
Christine Anyait is hoping to regreen the Karamoja region. She's among the few commercial tree farmers in the northeast part of Uganda. She started growing trees in 2017 and now owns close to 100 hectares of eucalyptus trees. Christine and 16 other farmers are determined to reverse the harsh climate in this region.
When I was young, we used to have a lot of trees in the area, and I used to see rain. But when the trees disappeared, the animals are breaking down, people are making charcoal, people are burning unnecessarily. The place became hotter and hotter, and I saw less and less rain. So my objective was to revive what I saw when I was young.
The rising temperatures in this part of the country are threatening food security, according to a study by the World Food Programme and the government. The UN is now empowering farmer groups with high-quality seeds to improve the climate in the region. Christine wants to sell timber from her trees, but her aim is to replant each one that is cut down. She's also encouraging other farmers in the area to start tree planting by selling them seedlings.
We need to continue on planting trees. Trees will bring wealth to this area, just like it brought wealth to Korea.
Uganda is said to be losing about 122,000 hectares of forests every year. The forest cover has been depleted to 9% from 24% in 1990. Most of the trees cut are used for fuel and construction. The government has a target of recovering 15% trees that have been lost in the last 2 decades by 2040, but it says it needs collective effort to achieve that. Environmentalists are calling for an urgent regreening campaign to avert a worsening situation.
The policies are there. The problem is enforcement. I think it's more a matter of enforcement because there are forest reserves, they are officially gazetted and they are protected, but people are still cutting the trees. And that's not only in Uganda, that's a worldwide phenomenon.
Scientists in Uganda are carrying out trials to find out the best tree species for drylands. For now, Christine says she will continue her campaign to reforest Karamoja with the hope of having it food secure. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's recap our top stories for the hour. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has called for an immediate pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Federal health agencies say there may be a connection between the vaccine and a rare disorder involving blood clots. The New York Times first reported at least 6 recipients had suffered severe side effects, including 1 death and 1 critical hospitalization. Burkina Faso's former president Blaise Compaoré has been charged in connection with the murder of another former leader, Thomas Sankara. The then president was killed in 1987 in a coup led by Compaoré. Compaoré fled to Côte d'Ivoire following his ouster in 2014. Previous efforts to arrest him in 2015 failed after Côte d'Ivoire declined to extradite him. And Japan's government has approved a plan to release more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive wastewater into the ocean from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga says the first release of nuclear wastewater into the ocean is to take place in about 2 years. The plan has sparked health and environment concerns both in Japan and nearby countries. Those are the stories that were making headlines this hour, but stories that are making headlines in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Data costs have fallen by 30% in South Africa. We'll have the details. And China's exports in the first quarter of the year have gone up by 40%.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market, it's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Over the last year, telecommunications companies around the world have seen an increasing amount of demand for data, voice, cloud and security offerings. In South Africa, players in the sector say that the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns have all highlighted the critical role played by the telecommunications sector. Angela Coppola takes up that story.
In South Africa, many office-bound workers continue to work from home, forcing businesses to keep their employees connected to ensure that business objectives are met.
Mobile connectivity is crucial, not just to keeping the economy in general going, but to allow businesses to keep operating. Because when you have remote working, it's not only a case of setting up Wi-Fi at homes, for example, but also enabling people to be able to work from anywhere. And that means mobile data becomes the foundation of communication and of collaboration.
I think both fixed and mobile have been crucially important over the last year during the lockdowns. And I was actually thinking back the other day, imagine having to go through this COVID-19 lockdown now, if this happened 10 years ago when all we had to connect with was maybe a flaky 3G network and ADSL. Luckily, there's been huge investment by the private sector in the last 5 years or so, particularly into fibre to the home infrastructure.
While everyone understands the need to provide bandwidth for the businesses to function, have mobile network operators met that increased demand?
I think the fact that ICASA, the communications regulator, made temporary emergency spectrum available to the operators pretty soon after the lockdown was announced last March, I think that's helped considerably because the operators have been able to use that additional spectrum to cope with the demand on their networks that we've seen.
While operators and businesses have been adjusting to the change in the business environment, the local competition authorities recently instructed the 2 biggest mobile network operators to cut the cost of their data bundles.
Something the operators don't like to admit is that they are highly profitable businesses, and that means they do have room to maneuver with pricing, and that further means that they can bring down the cost of data, especially for low-income users.
Well, the thing they always talk about is elasticity. That really refers to the ability of them, when they cut their prices, to make up that revenue loss through increased demand. And in many cases, we've seen one-on-one elasticity. So the price gets cut by 50% and the traffic increases by 50%, meaning the operator has effectively lost nothing.
The current pandemic has provided a business opportunity to mobile network operators because they have to provide an enhanced service to those businesses that are operating remotely. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Zimbabwe now. Small-scale horticulture farmers there are being encouraged to secure market access before they start production. That's in order to avoid being held to ransom by middlemen who end up paying them grossly unfair prices for their produce. From Harare, here's CGTN's Farai Mukutu exploring the plans being made to level the playing field and to empower small-scale farmers.
Rusitu Valley was the epicenter of Cyclone Idai in 2019. The area is renowned for fruit growing, and that's helping the community recover from the devastation. Pineapple farmers here are on the verge of getting certification to export their produce to Europe. Foreign currency earnings will help offset shortfalls they have suffered to some unscrupulous local traders.
Since 2011, I've been selling to traders who come with their own prices. Since there's no set price, we end up relying on individual negotiating skills. Having a gazetted price would help us forecast how much we're going to earn even before we harvest.
Because their produce is perishable, time is often not on their side and they end up being held ransom.
We are getting 20 cents per kilogram, which is very low. It's not enough to meet our daily needs. We would want a much higher price.
The farmers' predicament arises from an awareness gap, according to those trying to get them a better deal.
What we are saying to the farmers is that before you go into production, make sure that there is an off-taker for whatever you are going to produce. So specifically for the farmers that you are referring to, their experience is that you produce. When it comes to the marketing season, you are now looking for takers and you are under pressure because some of the commodities are perishable.
The authority has also intensified training on market requirements such as quality, size and variety, and that's helped some of the small-scale growers break into previously exclusive retail chains.
What that is done, I think at country level, is that we've seen a reduction in imports of certain commodities that are produced locally. But all this is through identifying farmers that are producing a certain commodity, then linking them up with the takers of that commodity at the right price.
Farmers have also been encouraged to make juice, jams and can their produce, which will not only give it a longer lifespan, but also increase returns. Farai Mukutu, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
On to North Africa now, where authorities in Tunisia have announced the creation of a fund to collect donations for vulnerable groups affected by the impact of the pandemic. The tourism-dependent North African state has been absolutely battered by the pandemic. It's left its economy reeling. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Najib Hamid is a chef who used to work at a restaurant in downtown Tunis. Since he lost his job a few months ago, Najib has been struggling to pay his rent and bills.
We are fed up with empty promises. We lost our jobs during the lockdown. Professionals cannot feed their children. The coronavirus crisis has caused the bankruptcy of thousands of restaurants.
53-year-old cafe waiter Arbi Mejri is, however, against the government aid. Instead, he is urging authorities to create an effective support mechanism which guarantees income protection during the pandemic.
I lost half of my income. Are these poor people supposed to beg the state for help? We need concrete solutions and real support from the government. The COVID-19 relief fund will not solve our problems because there are hundreds of thousands of professionals that have been affected.
Tunisian authorities said the COVID-19 Relief and Solidarity Fund will be created this week and have promised it will be managed in a transparent way. The country's Prime Minister Hisham Mashishi and his government officials will donate half their salaries for April.
We have created a national solidarity fund to help the people whose businesses and livelihoods have been affected by COVID-19. We invite all Tunisians, especially civil servants who have permanent salaries, to donate to the most vulnerable population. The COVID-19 jobs and income losses is unprecedented.
The World Bank Group's Board of Executive Directors approved recently $300 million in financing for the COVID-19 Social Protection Emergency Response Project. The new project will provide cash transfers for approximately 1 million vulnerable Tunisian households to help them deal with the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, while also supporting the rollout of a comprehensive national social safety net system. Tunisian Prime Minister said 1/3 of a $300 million World Bank loan will be directed to supporting vulnerable groups affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Hisham Mashishi added that the government will not abandon the citizens who have lost their jobs since the outbreak of the health crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's step outside the continent for a moment, specifically to China. Its trade performance in the first quarter of the year. The global recovery does continue to spur demand inside and outside of China for its products.
China's foreign trade is back in business. Foreign trade in the first quarter of 2021 surged by 29%, a significant boost as it's grown by 1/5 compared with data as far back as 2019. Exports grew by nearly 40% from last year, while imports increased by nearly 20%.
Global trade recovery is a major reason behind this growth. For instance, the Purchasing Managers Index of America, the EU, and Japan have all picked up, which led to China's export growth. China's domestic recovery and epidemic control also provided support.
In terms of specific products, imports of corn and wheat have surged compared to last year's data. Among exports, electromechanical products grew fast, making up 60% of the country's total exports. Last year, China signed the RCEP trade agreement with 14 nations, forming the world's largest free trade bloc. In the first quarter, China's trade with its RCEP trading partners grew by 23%.
Export growth comes mainly from a surge in exports in integrated circuits and automatic data processing equipment. China's imports of iron ore grew by over 60%.
Last year, global trading goods fell 5.3% due to the pandemic. The WTO predicts it could bounce back by 8% this year. But Li says China's trade still faces many uncertainties as COVID-19 continues to ravage many countries.
External factors could still affect China's foreign trade, not just the pandemic, but also unexpected situations such as the recent blockage of the Suez Canal, which affected international logistics in the short term.
Analysts expect China's foreign trade to continue the upward streak in the second quarter, but say growth rates could pare down due to geopolitical risks and rising costs for raw materials. Huiyao, CGTN, Beijing.
One last story for you. This one's from Egypt. The holy month of Ramadan also ushers in an increased use of lanterns over in Egypt. Lantern producers are always trying to introduce new models and new designs around this time. Here's CGTN's Adel Makhrouki with more.
Since 2004, Rania Yahya has worked as a tour guide. Last year, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the tourism industry hard, which made her jobless. Immediately, she shifted her career using skills she learned as a child from her mother to make macrame art. The ancient textile craft is based on knotting threads rather than weaving them. This Ramadan, Rania decided to make lanterns using this technique that dates back to the 13th century.
When I started the macrame, I wanted to create art that looks different. So I used geometrical shapes inspired from the Egyptian and Arabian architecture. The traditional Egyptian lantern remains unrivaled. I bought one this year. It is tied to our culture and our memories. It's also why I preserved the shape of that lantern when making the macrame lantern.
Rania is not the only artist attempting to revolutionize lantern making. Shawi is a third-generation glasswork craftsman in his family. Their workshop produces mosaics, lighting units, and chandeliers. Inspired by a new movement to update lantern designs, he decided to use his inherited knowledge of the craft to make the most popular lighting item during Ramadan.
Our traditional way of work is to create molds, which we blow gas into. To do that with lanterns would be very expensive. I had to create my own technique to assemble glass so they could look like a lantern.
The holy month of Ramadan is a motive for both artists to innovate. They try to create art pieces at affordable prices. But no matter how much they try, there is still a competitive gap with the well-established lantern market.
The cost is still more expensive than usual lanterns. The traditional ones take a couple of hours. I could spend days making one lantern.
Some people really liked that there are lanterns made of new materials like threads. I understand it's not going to be a trend yet. It takes time for people to accept new concepts. Still, the sales exceeded my expectations. I was planning production for much fewer lanterns.
This is their first attempt to engage with lantern manufacturing. While they're focusing to make each lantern stand out, their minds wonder about what the future carries for their little creations. Fresh lantern ideas are making this year holy month of Ramadan more exciting and maybe more joyful. It's also a courageous move from young Egyptians who tried to develop centuries-old lantern craft and make it their own. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of that hour, though. We'll be back in Egypt. The central bank of this cautioning investors on the use of Bitcoin, essentially citing its volatility. The same currency, of course, did hit an entirely new record this year. We'll have the details, of course, on that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thanks, Rama. Let's now take a short break. Your sport news is coming up, including Ugandan national team captain Dennis Onyango retires from international football.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for a look at what's happening in the world of sport. We kick off in Uganda, where national team captain Dennis Onyango has announced his retirement from international football. Onyango was the first goalkeeper to win the CAF Player of the Year based in Africa award and leaves the Uganda Cranes after 16 years of service following their failure to make the Cameroon 2021 Africa Cup of Nations finals. CGTN's Leon Senyanga reports.
The 35-year-old called an end to his international career on Monday. The announcement comes weeks after Uganda's failed bid to qualify for a third consecutive Africa Cup of Nations appearance. In his letter to the local football federation, Onyango reflected on what had been a distinguished career with the Uganda Cranes. The goalkeeper has been a mainstay in the national soccer team since making his debut in 2005, and he has since accumulated 80 caps for his country. He played at 2 Africa Cup of Nations, captaining his country at the 2019 edition. In 2017, Onyango was named the best player on the continent for his stellar performances for both his club, Mamelodi Sundowns of South Africa, and Uganda. The news of Onyango's retirement has, however, left many football fans here sad, despite many taking to social media to express their appreciation for his services. 3 goalkeepers, Jamal Salim, who plays for Al Hilal Omdurman in Sudan, Matthias Chigonya of Tanzania's Azam FC, and the local best Charles Lukwago of KCCA FC have been Onyango's understudies. One of them will be in goal when Uganda gets back to international football with the World Cup qualifiers later in June. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
In neighboring Kenya, the COVID-19 vaccination program for sports persons continued on Tuesday with the inoculation of the country's women Premier League players and officials. The move is part of efforts to allow the safe resumption of football in the country following the suspension of all sporting activities by President Uhuru Kenyatta on the 26th of March. Football Kenya Federation, in partnership with the country's Ministry of Health and Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, facilitated the COVID-19 vaccination drive in Nairobi, where 3 sides, Gasper Women, Kibera Soccer Ladies and Kayole Starlets, received the first batch of vaccines, with the rest of the WPL teams set to receive their doses in phases. Meanwhile, Starlets coach Joshua Sakwa has issued a rallying call to the government to bring back football in the country.
Players and coaches out here are struggling due to the suspension of football. Being vaccinated gives motivation that we can resume playing anytime. It has been difficult for Kayole Starlets to train as a team following the suspension of sports by government. We have been holding individual players training, and it has not been easy since some players have not been training due to challenges facing them.
We are not playing at the moment, and it is difficult for us as parents since our children are suffering. Our children would not be struggling if there was no suspension of sporting activity. Personally, I train at home, and it is affecting me because as a team, we need to train together so that you know your weaknesses or what you have improved on. I call on the government to lift